This is Retire Ready, where we break down retirement planning and make it easy to understand so you can live your golden years to the fullest. Planning your retirement starts now with your host, Kyle Hammerschmidt.
Hey there, everyone. Welcome to this week's episode. Today, I just want to cover a high-level case study. I had a discussion about 2 months ago that I kind of had earmarked that I knew I was going to do an episode on. So I had a discussion with a married couple. We'll just call them John and Mary. They live in the state of Kansas, and when they retire, their intentions are to stay in the state of Kansas. As we can see, John's 59, Mary's 59, so they're a pre-retiree couple, probably planning to retire in about 5 years. They're both actively working, bringing in taxable wages to the household for cash flow, both actively saving in their retirement plans. They're not gonna have sometimes there's a household that has like one spouse retires and then another spouse keeps working, like a delayed strategy. When one retires, they're both going to retire. So ideally that's about 5 years out. Each spouse has been actively working, so they're both entitled to Social Security. They have enough credits to claim on their own benefits. There's not going to be any spousal strategies in place. And then if you look at their retirement savings, kind of just where they're at right now, all their retirement savings are in 401ks and IRAs, which, if you've ever attended like a retirement masterclass or just do some reading, it might seem like, oh my God, all my money's in tax deferred accounts. What am I going to do? And it's like, congrats, you've done a great job at saving. It's now like moving forward, does it make sense to keep everything in tax deferred as you approach retirement and in retirement, having everything in tax deferred? So right now too, they were working with, when I first met them, they were actively working with an advisor that was on the back end really affiliated with LPL Financial. The advisor they were working with was also going to probably retire around the same time they were going to retire because they're about the same age. And then just again, household taxable wages were around $188,000. Again, household taxable wages, $188,000. And then their target retirement date would be either December of 2029 for each John and Mary, or January of 2030. So that would put John at 65 and 2 and Mary at 64 and 8. Again, that's when cash flow would start coming in from the retirement accounts. So if we kind of just take a high level view of their primary goals, they kind of understood like retirement planning is like a living, breathing document. It's not like Kyle's going to go give us all this advice one time for 30 years or LPL, wherever they could go to get their retirement planning done. It's like this thing's a living, breathing document. It's not like you can just set it, forget it, or a one-time snapshot. One of the main things that they wanted to make sure that they could do was maintain their lifestyle. Like, they're not on a budget. They make a healthy income. They don't want to be like on a budget in retirement to where like they can never go get that new car if they wanted to, or take that extravagant trip. So they just want to be able to maintain the lifestyle that they live now and figure out, is there something we could do to potentially lower our lifetime tax bills? So again, we talked about retirement dates. Another primary goal was to transition away from their LPL advisor, just coming to the realization that that advisor is probably going to retire either before they do or after they do. Their money's tied up. So basically they're working with an advisor, and that advisor works for the company where their money's held. So they kind of, thought, hey, does this make much sense to just be using only LPL or certain mutual fund class families, or, just really getting investment advice only, and we're not looking at all the other aspects, of retirement planning that could be more impactful. So maybe someone who was more retirement focused to help them get down the mountain for the next phase of their life. As far as investments, they've done a great job saving, but their main goal was to now restructure everything. Because I think this is one of the bigger, I'm not going to say mistakes, but like overlooked aspects of retirement planning when it comes to investments is there's not a proper transition of like how are we invested approaching retirement and going into retirement. So they just wanted to make sure that everything was restructured for growth, market volatility, and income. So like a market downturn next year, tomorrow, or like a week before they retired, or a year after they retired, didn't really like change the landscape of all their plans and goals. So they kind of wanted to start working on that strategy now and maximize their Social Security So when we look at the raw math here, after just discussions and looking at numbers, they did not want to wait until age 70. That was not the goal. However, they didn't know if they should take it right when they retire or at 66 or at 68 or at 65, but they knew for sure they didn't want to wait till 70 to claim. And they just wanted to feel more comfortable having more than a stack of statements and a diversified pie chart. So they really wanted to take that tax-focused approach. And then when you look at kind of their lifestyle, about $10,000 is what the target would be, and 7,000 of that 10,000. So basically 70% of their expenses are like discretionary, leaving around $3,000 or $36,000 per year for non-discretionary, whether it's travel or extra whatever they're doing. Okay. So that's kind of just a raw math. And if we look at their investments, take a step back, they got about 1.7 in tax deferred accounts. So they've done a really good job at saving. If you're watching, if you're listening, you're like, well, I don't have that much, or I have way more. The whole idea is typically, from my experience, just having discussions, building out plans, seeing what how their lifestyles are. No one really wants to be on a budget or a fixed income. But in general, the more you have saved, the more you could spend in retirement. Not always. A bigger balance doesn't mean more spending power. It kind of depends on some other complexities. But they got about 1.7, so 500,000 in John's IRA. He had a former employer plan he rolled over to LPL. Mary's still actively working for her employer, so she has about $750,000 in her 401k actively making contributions. Mary has an old IRA with about $125,000 for about 10 to 15 years. They were making tax deductible contributions to an IRA because their income was low enough. And then John has a 401k with about $333,000 in that. And as it's all split out as a holding, they're really like 60-40 on how everything looks right now. So that's how they look from an investment perspective. The only other asset they really have is their primary home, which is worth about $715,000. And then they got another $118,000 in checking, savings, and money markets. So when we take a look at their income adjustment plan, before we dive into like what they could spend and what these increases or decreases need to look like, as I mentioned, they are both entitled to Social Security. So John's primary insurance amount, which is your full retirement age, is at, let's see what that time that age that's at. So he's going to basically, when we look at all the math here for John, his full retirement age would be, according to the calculation, age 67 for each of them. So John and Mary's full retirement age is age 67. So John's $3,689, Mary's is $3,100 if they were to wait to their full retirement age. When we look at the math, basically we came to a conclusion of looking at the numbers of when. That's really like one of the bigger decisions married couples have, or just anyone in general. It's like, should you take Social Security earlier and enjoy it in your earlier, younger, more go years, and delay taking as much out from your investments, or should you delay taking Social Security to get that higher cumulative lifetime benefit? There's pros and there's cons of doing each. At the end of the day, you have to understand, what are you trying to accomplish within your plan? Is it tax strategy? Is it withdrawals? Where are the markets at this time? Are we okay potentially, if we live a long life, leaving a couple extra $100,000 on the table from Social Security? Really, you're just going to look at all the pros and the cons and then basically make that decision. So according to their plan, John was going to take, they're each going to claim January of 2030 in a fresh tax year. John was going to bring about $40,000 in from Social Security, and then Mary would bring about $32,000 in from Social Security every year as tax preference income for the rest of their life. So really, almost any calculator that you look at online, or if I run it and basically say, hey, if you plan on living to like 85 plus, almost every calculator that's not looking at tax strategy and tax diversification and investments and all this other fun stuff, and how you what's your spending strategy and how you want to enjoy your money in retirement, almost every calculator is going to say the primary strategy is wait till 70, or wait as long as you can to get the highest cumulative benefit. As I mentioned, we came to a conclusion to take it January 2030, which would have been 65 and 2 for John, and Mary was 64 and 8. And just looking at some, a breakdown of the math here. So if we look at, the roadmap strategy of them taking it January 2030 versus maybe their primary strategy of them both waiting till 70, the cumulative break-even point is at age 81. And I'll just be friendly. Let's just say it's 80. So basically at age 80, the calculation is basically saying if you're still living, you probably should have waited to take Social Security at 70. You would have got a higher cumulative lifetime payment every year that you keep living. And, we just came to the conclusion that if, in 2050 something happens and, you guys are no longer here, you left $167,000 in change on the table that you could have collected from Social Security. And they made the decision, like, if that was the case and that happened, they're not going to be upset with like, hey, we should have waited. We're happy we took it a little bit earlier, use that money to enjoy it, to do some extra travel, or maybe they just slept better at night, knowing that they did not have to take as much money out from their investment portfolios as they retired. So there's a case for them to do what they did, or even to wait a little bit longer. But that at the end of the day, this is the decision they made that was in their best interest, that allowed them to sleep the best. So let's kind of just move on from Social Security. If we look at just like their general savings, like they are putting in right now, Mary's putting in $2,000 per month into her 401k, and obviously those are broken up into monthly, but it is biweekly. And then John does about $1,400. So there is money like still getting added into the pile of the money, or onto the pile of the retirement assets. But again, that's not really the primary focus because right now they're fully funded. And then, as we mentioned, from expenses, they got about $10,000 as their baseline expense, and then $7,000 of that's never going to go away in retirement. So if we just take away and say, well, maybe we don't know what they need. Hey, Kyle, here's what we have. Here's our resources. Here's when we retire. Here's Social Security. Here's how much we're putting in. What would be a realistic expectation of like, here, how much could we spend in retirement? So that number for them, like their projected balance would be around 2.4, and that would allow them to spend around $12,400 after tax in retirement if their goal was to avoid underspending in retirement. So, avoid retiring with $2 million and then dying with $5 million in 30 years or something like that. So they really wanted to know, like, how could we have, what could our spending capacity be? And what adjustments would we have to make again if markets were to go up and down? So really, 12,400 is what they could get. They really only need 10,000. They wouldn't have to make any adjustments to their lifestyle unless their portfolio dropped to about 1.7.
So like the biggest question would be, taking away from all this, like, hey Kyle, this all sounds great, but like, how much could we spend? That's the biggest question some people have, is like, what's their spending capacity? So, with a projected balance of around 2.3, 2.4, 2.5, spending capacity after tax could be about $12,400 per month. If that goal originally was to avoid underspending in like our early go-go years. So like using that spending smiley face of using the money while we're younger to enjoy it, to avoid underspending and leaving a big pile of money behind. So target was about 2.4, spend 12,000 after tax per month. The plan for income increases ever in the future is if that portfolio value hits closer to about 2.7 to 2.8, they could ramp up that spending to about $13,500 per month after tax if they wanted to. And the only time they would have to ever plan for a spending decrease in those early retirement years, or just even later in retirement, that bottom guardrail is going to hit about 1.7. They would need to cut back about $1,000 per month net to kind of keep everything in place during the trajectory of that plan. If you just kind of look at the stress test, hey, what would this look like in different periods of times? So if you look at, the 07, 09 financial crisis, if we retired and something like that were to occur, over the next 14 years, basically it's saying in like January of 2014, they got a planning increase based upon their spending capacity and how everything was invested. They didn't make any adjustments during 07, 08, and 09. What they really got was planned spending increases in 2016 and 2014. So like I said, you can stress test this in like different types of environments, looking at high withdrawal rates, low withdrawal rates, spendings. But again, you're just kind of just back testing you to give you a good idea of, how would this react in different market type environments. And then that big question would be, looking at their stuff from a tax planning perspective. As I mentioned, they have $188,000 in 2024, and we're just going to carry that over and say, all right, let's just imagine everything's the same. 2025, $188,000 of taxable wages is going to show up on your federal tax return. If you just look at that case scenario, they have about $48,500 of room inside the 22% bracket. So some people are always wondering, like, how much room do I have inside my existing tax bracket? I want to stay within that effective tax rate, and could I do Roth conversions? And really, this household, to play it safe, you probably wouldn't do $48,500, but that's how much room they have based upon the estimates that we were given. If they did that $48,500 conversion, that federal tax bill incremental, like, hey, my favorite uncle, I'm going to be on purpose writing you this extra tax bill, is $10,670. And more than likely, if I'm working with this household or putting a plan together like we did, we're going to recommend using those money market funds to pay this tax bill, just because it's sitting there earning 1, 2, 3, 4%. But if you don't have those types of checkings and savings or money market balances, one thing they could do is, I run into a lot of people that are like overstuffing their 401ks, and what they could do is like, hey, your saving rate needs to be this much, but you're saving this much. You can afford to save less in your employer plans, cash flow money, more money to your checkings and savings, and then use that money to pay this tax bill that you incurred on purpose, because at this point, tax diversification is more important than overstuffing your pre-tax 401k. But more than likely, a lot of plans are going to say, you could err on the side of caution and just fill up your tax bracket. But typically, the more aggressive strategy is going to win and kind of let you spend that tax money up front a little faster. So they could go all the way up to that 24% bracket and do $236,000 of Roth conversions for like 25 and 26 if they wanted to. And they're basically incurring another $55,000 in change in estimated taxes. They're just saying, I want to start paying some now versus waiting. This is going to help us tax diversify, lower our lifetime tax bills, keep more of our Social Security, make sure John or Mary's taken care of so they have tax-free income if one of us were to pass. And then when we hit our RMDs, we're not going to have required minimum distribution traps. But at the end of the day, like, the target was by 2030 to be in a position where they could still take out about $40,000 a year from their IRA distributions, and then have about $72,000 of Social Security coming in on their tax return, and then $33,000 would show up as taxable. If they can kind of get to a position where everything lines up, where they're having the $40,000 plus the $72,000 of Social Security, $33,000 is going to show up on the tax return. Their marginal bracket would be 12%, and their average on all of their income 6.4. They're going to pay roughly about $4,800 in federal taxes. They don't have to worry about IRMA or any of that other fancy stuff. And then they'll have enough money, like I said, in the Roth in the future for their kids, for them to spend or to take care of that surviving spouse. But at the end of the day, it really comes down to taking your resources. What type of tax strategy are you going to implement? What type of Social Security strategy are you going to implement to make sure you're keeping more of that benefit net after tax over your lifetime? Spending strategies, guardrails for them, they wanted to maximize. What type of investment strategy are you going to use to align within your retirement plan? For them, it was basically saying, we're going to take a chunk of money and set it aside in a cash war chest. So, for example, if they're going to have 10 years of portfolio withdrawals and it's going to be $60,000 a year or $80,000 or $90,000, whatever that number is going to be. Let's just say it's five years of $100,000. You're going to set about $500,000 aside in laddered U.S. Treasuries to kind of just say, hey, this is our lifeboat. If the markets go down, we're going to live on this money and let our stocks recover. If this market keeps going up, great. We still have a portion of our money growing. So that's what they're doing from like an investment philosophy. Again, I hopefully you guys enjoyed this episode, because it's really like a couple who's the same age, 59, retiring in 5 years, same plans, don't underspend, implement tax planning, maximize their Social Security, doesn't want to wait till 70, which is pretty common. I have a lot of conversations with people, like, they kind of want the same stuff, not always, but what they have and their time horizons and their household situations was usually different. So hopefully you enjoyed today's episode.
You've been listening to Retire Ready with Kyle Hammerschmidt. Planning your retirement starts now. We hope you've enjoyed the show. If you did, make sure to like, rate, and review. We'll be back soon.